All right, Luke chapter 15, beginning at verse number 11. We're going to read verses 11 through 19. When you got to say, ma'am. Amen. Hear the word of the Lord. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided the property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him into the fields to feed his pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. I want to reiterate for extra emphasis, verse number 17, clause A. When he came to his senses. I want to preach using as a subject today, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep living like this. Will you recite with me our reason for being? We exist to introduce people. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Would you look at somebody next to you and tell them something got to change today? Something's got to change today. Beloved sisters and brothers, it is often suggested that whenever one looks outwardly at nature, it is there where that individual can discover where God has been. It is through nature that we learn where God has already worked. And we know this to be true because in the opening scene of the Bible, God chooses to introduce himself by putting on an exhibition of his creative brilliance. He burst out on the scene, Pastor Sherwin, and he shows us what type of person he is by revealing to us his power to create the world with words. And so, church, I don't know if you recognize this or not. I don't know even if you stand in awe of this, but whenever you look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, it is evident that God has been there. When you look at fish that swim in the sea, beasts that roam on the field, birds that fly through the air, that's evident to where God has been. The season has changed. We have now moved from summer to fall, and you and I have the wonderful privilege of watching the changing colors of the leaves turn from green to brown. This is another reminder of where God has been. But God, in his exhibition of his creative brilliance, didn't stop at nature. He displays his creative genius even more by demonstrating his amazing ability to reach his hand down into the nothingness that he labeled dirt. Place his hand on the nothingness of the dirt. Begin to form and fashion nothing into a substance that would eventually take shape after his image. God then blows the breath of life into the nostrils of this image of the nothingness called dirt and created something out of the nothingness that was available to him and called him man, or in scientific terms, human. Sisters and brothers, God placed inside of him everything necessary for the man to live a life that would glorify God. Everything that we need for life and godliness is already inside of us. God placed inside of this man, this being, significance. He placed inside of him greatness, placed inside of him his destiny, placed inside of him his purpose, placed inside of him creativity and goals, ideas and concepts. And I don't know if you've caught on to it, but I'm letting you know that all of this is inside of you. The reason why God created you is not to drive a BMW 745. The reason that God created you was not for you to live in a split level house. The reason that God created you is so that you could exhale what God inhaled in you when he created you. And so as a consequence of this, whenever you and I, as children of God, whether children by way of the cross or children by way of creation, whenever we look inwardly at ourselves, we not only see where God has been by way of creation, but we see where God is currently at work. Church, I believe this is a good place to stop and remind you, for the benefit of those who may have forgotten, God lives inside of you. Would you do me a favor? Would you just place your hand somewhere, anywhere on your body and just say, he is here, he is here, he is here. But regrettably, even sometimes with the knowledge that the Spirit of God is living on the inside of us, because of the sin that takes up space and permeates through us. Many of us, whenever we look in the mirror at our present condition, we are forced to come face to face with the reality that as much as we shout on Sunday, as much as we lift our hands, as much as anointed as we appear to be, as long as we've been in church, there are still areas of our lives, if we're honest with ourselves, that, if I can use this vernacular, it's toe up from the flow up. There are areas in our lives that are completely jacked. In her book entitled Get Out of That Pit, noted author and renowned Christian evangelist and, dare I say, alumni from Texas State University, Beth Moore shares with us in her book Get Out of That Pit that there are 3 distinct and different ways that an individual can find themselves in a negative situation that she calls a pit. Now, it's interesting when you read a book that she notes that pits don't necessarily all have to be related to sin. She posits for our consideration that there are only 3 things necessary for a pit to appear in your life. Let me give them to you. She says, in order for you to experience a pit, you have to experience a feeling of being stuck. You have to have an inability to stand on your own, and you have to have a lack of vision. Sisters and brothers, if any of these 3 elements are present at the same time, if you're ever in a place where you feel like you can't move, you can't stand, and you cannot see, you, my friend, are in a pit. She goes on further in her book to tell us 3 ways that an individual can end up in a pit. She says you can be thrown into a pit, using Joseph from Genesis as her case study, suggesting that our arrival to our negative situation is a direct decision of somebody else. The mindset of an individual who is thrown into a pit sounds a little like this: it's all their fault. So in no uncertain terms, hear me, they have the right to blame somebody else for why they are where they are. She goes on further to say, in addition to being thrown into a pit, you can end up in a pit 2 other ways. You can unintentionally slip into a pit. And usually when you slip into a pit, this is the result of naivety or inexperience. Or you can, too, intentionally just plain old jump into a pit. Now that's trifling, but it's true. Now both of these entries into the pit suggest that the reason that we are experiencing difficulty in our life is not because of somebody else, but because of choices or lack of choices that are made with the power that God gave us when he made us in his own image. And as I look around this room, I would dare say in a room like this that many of you, even with your good, nice fall church clothes on this morning, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because at several key moments in our lives, we managed to become our own worst enemy. We've pursued and, dare I say, obtained master's degrees in mess making. There were seasons in our lives when we would try to take 2 steps forward only to get knocked back 5 steps. We know what it feels like to kill our own progress because of fears and failures. And in a very real sense, if we're honest, we become frustrated because we wish we could have had somebody just throw us in this situation, because at least we could blame somebody else for why we are where we are. But the fact of the matter is, when we turn around and look back at our past mistakes and at all the things that we've gotten wrong, there are a set of footprints in the mud leading up to the pit. And then when we look down at our shoes, we notice we the one that got mud on our shoes, and we can't blame nobody but ourselves. We can't blame mama or daddy, ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, ex-husband, ex-wife, our crazy cousins. We can't blame the man, or we can't even blame the devil. And we find ourselves at times, I know y'all ain't woke up yet, it's okay. We find ourselves sharing the sentiments of the Apostle Paul when he surmises his own sin struggle in Romans chapter 7, when he says, the things that I want to do, I don't do. And the stuff I hate to do, that's what I find myself doing. For some sick, twisted, and seemingly trifling reason, when I want to do good, evil shows up and steps in my way, and I end up doing what is wrong. What a wretched man that I am. Who's going to save me from myself? When the sun rises on our text in Luke chapter 15, Jesus is practically at the pinnacle of his earthly ministry. He is ascending to the pinnacle of his earthly ministry. Sisters and brothers, over the span of a couple of years, Jesus has been doing the doggone thing. He's been making tremendous strides as a leader. He's increasingly becoming popular throughout the region because everybody knows him to be the preacher. He's becoming popular because of his ability to teach and heal and do miracles. And church, what is significant to note at the outset of the text, Luke chapter 15, is this. At the height of Jesus' ministry and popularity, notice that he didn't allow the popularity to go to his head. Yes, he's doing great things. People know who he is, but he hasn't forgotten who he is. He hasn't forgotten where he's come from, and he hasn't forgotten why he's doing what he's doing. So notice, you read Luke chapter 15, beginning at verse number 1, we do not find him hobnobbing with the elite of the Jewish society. He's not even hanging out with the church folk. When you read Luke chapter 15, verse number 1, we find Jesus, the Holy One of Israel, hanging out with the last, the least, and the leftover. Get this. At the height of Jesus' popularity, he chooses to spend time breaking bread with tax collectors and sinners. These are people who, according to the church folk in the culture, these were the people who would deem the low-down scum of the earth. And I'm not sure exactly who I'm talking to in this 8 o'clock crowd, but that's good news for about 2 or 3 of us in this room who perhaps thinks that God has forgotten about you because you've done too much wrong. You've participated in too much dirt. You've made too many bad choices. You've told too many lies, gossiped on too many people in the church. Y'all ain't talking back to me. Said too many cuss words, smoked too many bags of weed, drank too many, I don't even know what y'all drank. There it is. Had too many sex partners, failed too many times, and you feel like Jesus won't receive you where you are. The reason I pause here to celebrate this morning is because Jesus does this as a reminder to all of the bourgeois, highfalutin, perfect people who come to church every Sunday that God gets his greatest glory and he gets his greatest joy when he shows grace to people who know that they don't deserve his grace. I wish I had somebody. People who, for whatever reason, find themselves out on the margins of life and find themselves face first in a pitiful living situation. And so I wonder this morning, is there anybody in the room who can stop, pause and celebrate God that no matter where you are in life, no matter how far out you are in life, no matter how worthless other folk may think you are, you serve a God, God Almighty, that reminds you that you are valuable to him and you are precious to him. You serve a God that has shown you that you are never too far away from his grace, where his grace can't reach out and touch you. Is there anybody in here that's hippopotamus happy and gorilla glad this morning to know that you serve a God that not only has sustaining and saving grace, but is there anybody this morning that's thankful that God has sufficient grace? For his grace is still sufficient for you and I, and his strength is made perfect in our weakness. Do me a favor. I know you don't usually do this. Look up toward heaven and just tell God, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for choosing me when other people didn't want me. Thank you for reaching out to me when others would tell me I would never amount to anything. Thank you for loving me even though people told me I'd be just like my lazy, trifling, good-for-nothing father. Thank you for reaching out to me even when I didn't have the strength to reach out and touch you. Thank you for your grace. When we come to this very familiar passage of scripture that begins at verse number 11, Luke chapter 15, we are introduced to a young man who appears, Pastor Sherwin, to be struggling with an identity crisis. When we get to verse 14, we know he's struggling because of where we find him in the text. Where we find him is completely beneath him. Living in the pit is the total antithesis. It is the very opposite of everything that he knows and everything that he is accustomed to. He has disconnected himself from all of the people who wanted better for him. And so as a consequence of this, he has forgotten who he is. He's forgotten where he's come from. And more importantly, he has forgotten who he belongs to. And so therefore, he has, when we see him in the text, he has allowed the circumstances and conditions of the culture around him to begin to shape him. Okay, he no longer operates in the authority that was given to him by his father, because now he's a part of a culture that doesn't care anything about where he comes from, and they doggone sure don't care about who his daddy is. And to make matters worse, while he's in his pitiful situation, 8 o'clock, he never recognizes that the people who he thought he could lean on for help really don't have his best interests at heart. And so they can't be trusted because the nature of the relationship is twisted. Verse 15 tells us that he is connected to somebody who would really prefer him to continue to settle for less than what he's worth, because this friend recognizes that the more this young man settles, the more he benefits. I think I ought to pause right here to tell somebody in the room, don't know who I'm talking to, every growing relationship is the result of a mutual beneficial relationship. You and I, if we want to be a part of growing relationships, have to be connected to people who say, as you grow, I grow. And as I grow, you ain't going to have no choice but to grow if you're going to stay connected to me. And so needless to say, at this point in this gentleman's life, we can deduce that this man's current life choices is a warning for us of some things that we should not do, not cannot do, but should not do. And so the critical question that I really want to ask and answer in our time together is simply this. If we desire to get out of our pits, what lessons do we need to learn from the mistakes that this young man makes? There are 3 critical lessons. I'm going to give them to you, and we're going home. Lesson number 1. never focus too much on the future. Never focus too much on the future. This boy has become distracted by what is to come. Verses 11 through verse 13, this young man has his immaturity exposed. Theologians suggest that because this young man is still single without children or a wife, that he is probably in his late teenage years. And so the text says in verse number 12, out of his immaturity, he goes to his father and begins to demand of his daddy. He says to his father, who, by the way, has been good to him, give me my share of your hard-earned money. Hold up. Wait a minute. He says, give me my share of your money. Which one of these do not belong? Notice the young man says to his daddy, give me, which exposes where his focus is. His focus is on me. At this point in his life, he is wrapped up in himself, and he doesn't care about anybody, and he sure doesn't care about his father. He says to his father, I know how hard you've worked for this. I know it's yours. I know I didn't work a day in my life for it. I never earned it. I really don't deserve it, but give me what belongs to me, and I can't wait any longer. I need you to give it to me now.